I feel like home. I feel like family. It's outstanding. I'll tell you, it doesn't feel like that in a public university. I can actually say, I don't need to go to hell. I don't need to go to hell. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So you just heard that my day job is that of professor. I've also had an opportunity over my career to be a political trainer. I've done political policy as a political policy writer. I've even been a political candidate. Now today I'm going to be talking to you. I have the pleasure of talking to you about the practical side of political activism. And I want to cover how churches and church leaders get involved politically. And a lot of that will be the bulk of my talk today. So church leaders getting involved. But let's say you're not a church leader. Go back and tell your church leader what they can do to be involved. I'm also going to be covering, to a lesser extent, what lay Christians can do to be involved politically. So I'm going to give you a lot of how-tos. Today is all about the how-tos. But before I get to the how-tos, I want to begin with a what, and then I'll provide you with a why. That's what I'm going to do, yeah. So I guess we'll move here first. What? It's the what. What is, and we've had a little bit of this already, by the way, what is political activism? Well, activism, it's easy. Activism is do something. Activism is do something. But what is it to do something political? Well, yes, it can mean running for office. We talked about that. Or helping out with the campaign of a trustee or a counselor, like a city councilor or MP or MPP. That's usually what we think of first. But political means much more. To do something political is to engage in a public contest against a rival group or groups in an attempt to have your ideas, beliefs, and values triumph. That sounds a bit messy, doesn't it? Political activism is doing something publicly that advances the interests of your group, and it will undermine the interests of another group. Goes against that whole idea of play nice with each other. Because there's going to be, well, on occasion, there'll be a win-win, but not usually. Usually there's winning and there's losing, and you're replacing something with something else. So if you're not winning, then you're losing. And so what you want to feel is you want to feel assured that what you're bringing forward is the best for everybody. And luckily, if you have the mantle of Christ, you know that what you're bringing forward is the best for everybody. And it's not just your personal opinion. You've got 2,000 years of societal flourishing that says you're right. So when someone says, well, why would your ideas get to take precedent over others? You say, well, because historically, we're the ones that worked. Now, I won't be going into that in great deal, but I want you to know that you are promoting one side over another. So it's a war of words, even actions, so that your ideas get reflected in society. But there's a big distinction between political activism and another kind of activism. This is not military activism. We're not dealing with armaments here, right? I want to just make that clear. Our battle is going to be with words and with deeds, but when we do our deeds, we don't hold weapons, we don't have armaments. It's not like in Ireland, they actually have this movement for Irish independence. Now, the military side is called the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the political side. In Ireland, it's called Sinn Féin, which means freedom. We're not really like them at all. I'm just saying that there does exist in the world these two sides. We're only talking about political activism. So now we have reference, though, to military activism. It's fresh in our mind. That's a perfect segue going from what to why. Why? Well, the reason why is we don't want to do military activism. Why do we want political activism? We want political activism so we don't get to the point where we need to do military activism. And historically, that has happened. And we don't want that to happen. Because we follow the Prince of Peace. And so peace is our mandate, in as much as we can. But surveying the lay of the land, our home and native land, Canada, I'd estimate that we probably have about a decade or two left in which conservative Christians will be free to openly partake in political activism. And now there's another reason. There's another reason why Christians today need to commit to political activism. And we've heard about it already. It's because we're commanded to. You're told, go. Because all authority belongs to Christ, you go and you teach the government, because the government is going to then instruct people, guide people, in how to obey the commands of Christ. It's non-negotiable. When the disciples said to Jesus, "Can you teach us how to pray?" He said, "Sure. Here's what you do. Our Father who art in heaven, holy be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth." How does that happen? Politically. If you want a kingdom to come on earth, you actually need to be creating the laws. You actually need to be influencing the society. The calls for political activism are everywhere. Now that's funny because I increasingly come up against clergy who tell me that I'm out to lunch. They say, you shouldn't be doing political activism. We're about spreading the gospel. And I say, how do you think the gospel gets spread? How do you think the gospel got spread in the Soviet Union when they said, we'll kill you if you try? It's a really good thing if you've got laws in your country that say it's okay to spread the gospel. And increasingly, I can tell you on our university campuses, you can't spread the gospel. So keep that in mind, that when they tell you, when these fellow brothers and sisters in Christ say you shouldn't be doing political activism, you say to them, well, do you think that the laws of Christ should be the laws of the land, that they should be influencing the laws of the land? If they say no, they're not a Christian. If they say yes, they are a Christian. And then you say, well, do you think that that's going to happen better if you're involved in the political system? And the answer is yes. This idea of doing nothing in the political sphere is really a new phenomenon. I mean, if you look back before World War II, the people, the political leaders across the West, they spoke very boldly about this is because of Christ. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, when he would do his fireside chats, he'd say, we are a democratic Christian nation. It was explicit. So this idea that we have to relegate Christianity to the ash heap of history, it's not correct. So we better do something. We better do something. So let's talk about how. And that's where we are. Part 1. Political activism for churches and church leaders. So in this part of the presentation, I'm going to focus specifically on the political activism of churches and church leaders. And then later in part 2, as I said, I'm going to get into some other things that Christians, lay Christians more generally can do. But before I get to that, one more bold assertion. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. The gold standard for us when we're talking about political activism should be striving to get our people, devout believers, elected to public office. Followers of Christ need to be the school trustees. Even if your kids are homeschooled or they're in a Christian school, we still need to be the trustees of the public board because we need to make sure that those children are not being harmed. It's as simple as that. You need to be the municipal councillors. You need to be the provincial MPPs and the federal MPs. We need to get Christians into public office. Because unless you're inside, you're not making the laws. Here I have on the screen, I've got a chef. I like to think of it like this. Meals are made by the cooks in the kitchen. Everybody else just has to eat what is served to them. So if you don't want a steady diet of soul-destroying progressive laws and policy, you need to have the right cooks using the right recipe book. And I would say as a first step, we need to be intentional within our larger Christian communities to be actively scouting for good people who can be advanced as political candidates. You need to be looking in your churches. You need to be looking among your youth. If you've got a Christian school, look at who leads already. The scouting could be done officially by the pastor, or the pastor can delegate it to someone else. But let's get this straight. It's got to be somebody's job. We can't leave it to chance anymore. We have to be identifying who those people are. And we need to give them a nudge. We need to say, have you thought about being politically active? We need to specifically say that, because if they are really a good person, and if they're really supposed to be a political activist, they probably are too humble to move in that direction themselves. If there's a saying that the person who should run for politics is the person who doesn't want to. And so therefore, we need to have an office of the nudge. And that office identifies those people and say, hey, you know what? You got the stuff. So this office of the political nudge, I'm not going to describe what that'll look like. I'll leave that with you. Think about it amongst your Christian communities and come up with something. But we really need to be intentional. Then once we identify these people, we need to train them long before the election happens. Maybe even while they're young. We need to train them in public speaking. We need to train them in political theory. And we need to train them in Christian worldview. And I'm willing to help with that. I'm going to make the commitment. You know, I hate it when somebody comes up to the front and says, you need to, and then that's it. I'm telling you, I'll help. I will help. I'm particularly interested in working with young people who want to be Canadian, Christian, political activists. And if you have that vision, let's get organized. The sponsors of this conference, they've got my contact information. I've been running Christian leadership camps for 20 years. I stopped just after the pandemic. And I'm willing to commit my time. And you know, we need to commit our time because this is already happening among secular organizations. They're already going out to events where somebody's speaking. They're reading trade journals to see who the mover and shaker is. And then they're going to them and they're taking them out, giving them dinner and drinks. And they're saying, hey, have you ever thought about running for our party? They're being identified. We need to do the same, but our candidates will be better. They'll be different because they'll be men and women of integrity. I have a quick story. So I was speaking. I was at my university, and there was this big controversy over a young woman who had played a videotape that had shown on public TV, and it was talking about transgendered stuff. And she was just saying, look at this. And she was considered to have done a hate crime, etc., etc. So I came to her defense, and we organized a rally for freedom of expression. And I was saying how my university was wrong because it was always taking the side of the oppressor, contrary to what they pretended to do. Anyway, the story that I'm telling you is that out of that, I got approached by a political party. They said, would you run for us? I'd never thought of it before. I said, I'll give it a try. Sure, what do you do? They gave me this pamphlet. They say, okay, fill out this form. So I filled out the form. And then I had a meeting, and I said, this is so exciting because I've really wanted an opportunity to talk about radical gender ideology. And I wanted to show and I wanted to talk about my pro-life views. Thank you. I've been looking forward to this. And they said, ho, 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 we actually don't want you to run for us. So, I mean, there's going to be a little bit of that. I'm going to let you negotiate that out there. But we need to identify who in our churches, who in our Christian community. It needs to be done at the level of the elders or somebody in authority who's looking for these people, and then we need to give them the training. You know what, I lied to you. I said we were at part 1. We weren't yet. Now, for real this time, we're at part 1, where I'm going to talk to you about political activism for churches and church leaders. Now, this is going to be taken directly from the Income Tax Act and other bits of legislation. I've tried to make it as palatable as possible, but it's the things that you actually need to know. So I'll focus on churches and church leaderships, how they can engage in political activism, and you have to pay close attention because the laws surrounding what religious organizations and religious officials can do related to political campaigns and political endorsements is really strict. And if you break the law, if you're a Christian church, you will have your charitable status removed. And this has frightened a lot of churches into silence. They just don't say anything at all, even though they could. And I know that it was a little bit of a buzz crusher there, a little bit of a joy killer, a killjoy, by saying, you'll lose your charitable status. But I've got some good news. The good news is, and I think it's good news that a lot of pastors don't realize, a lot of church folks don't realize, that you actually have a lot of room. Political restrictions on churches are few. It's just don't mess up. Don't mess up. So my goal is to tell you what the rules are so you don't mess up. I'm going to go point for point and tell you what a church or a religious leader cannot do. I'll say, here's what you cannot do. And then we'll get all joyful. We'll smile again, and I'll say, ha-ha. But for each of those points, you also get to do these things. So here we go. All right. Churches can't provide support to a political candidate. So realize that. That means the church or the pastor in his official capacity or elders, if you are working in an official capacity with your church, on behalf of your church, you can't provide financial support or indirect support. So what do I mean by indirect support? You can't let them use the photocopier. You can't say, well, listen, we have some people on staff who do audio visual. We're going to get them to do the video stuff for you for free. We're paying them, but come on in and they'll do it. You can't do that. Can't give them office space. Anything that would be a resource of your church, you can't do that. So no financial support, no indirect support. If they pay you, so here's a little bit of a difference. If they pay you, they say, can I rent this hall to hold a political meeting? You can do that if they pay you. It has to be fair market value. You can't give them a cut rate because they go to your church. But we wonder, do you want to do that? Do you want to set the precedent? Because let's say then the free love party hears that you're renting out your church. And now they want to rent your church. And it just gets messy. So you might want to consider whether or not you will allow your church at fair market value to be rented. There's more good news. As a private citizen, a pastor or people employed by the church can give financially. They can. They can also give of their professional advice. So let's say you're a pastor and you're particularly good at writing sermons. Maybe you're also a good speechwriter. As a private citizen, you could assist a political candidate in that regard. Let's say that your full-time job is to do audiovisual stuff at your church. You really are good at video production. Well, as long as you're willing to do it for the candidate for free outside the church, not when you're being paid by the church, you can do that as well. So that's good news. Now let's get back to the thou shalt not list. Churches can't endorse or denounce candidates or parties. So, that is in your official capacity. That is to say, you really don't like the Liberals, you can't say that from the pulpit. You can't denounce a political party. Let's say you really don't like Justin Trudeau. You can't say, I really don't like Justin Trudeau. You can't do it from the pulpit. Nor can you do it through any of your official channels. So that means on your website, on your social media, anything. Churches can't endorse or denounce. I guess I was only doing the denouncing. You also can't say, I really like this person. Vote for this person. I really like this party. Vote for this party. You can't do that. You cannot do that as a church through any of your official channels. Conversely, as a private citizen, you can endorse or denounce. So let's say the pastor said, I'm going to use my private email, and I'm going to write a letter to the people in my the people I'm very close to in my congregation, and just say, I don't like that. I'm going to use Justin Trudeau. I really don't like Justin Trudeau, and I really don't like the Liberal Party. And you were a private citizen, writing as a private citizen, but you make sure you say that. If you are a pastor or you are employed at a church and you are saying something about a political candidate or a political party, even in your private email, you must specifically say, I'm speaking as a private citizen. It's somewhat implicit that you're sending it from your private email, but to cover yourself, you say, I'm speaking as a private citizen. You can also appear in a public meeting. You can appear on broadcast, and you can say, I don't like Justin Trudeau. I don't like the Liberal Party. But you, again, in that broadcast or that public meeting, I'm about to speak as a private citizen. You need to make that disclaimer. Those were the significant thou shalt nots. Here's something that blows a lot of people away. A church can endorse or denounce government laws and policy. A lot of people don't realize this. This can be done from the pulpit. This can be done on the social media channels of your church. This can be done in a brochure that you hand out to your neighborhood. And you can say that it's coming from your church. The idea here is that you are attacking an idea and not a person or a group of people. Not the politician and not the party. So any government law, any government policy, any government decision can be criticized. Now, as it's written in the legislation, it's by a charitable organization, and the church is a charitable organization. If you wanted to run a TV commercial where you were just simply running down, let's look at it more positively. You were trying to persuade your community to accept a particular idea about a policy, you could do that. But, I'm going to say this now. I'm also going to say it later. But you cannot link it to a political party, and you cannot link it to a specific politician. It's like the law has to just, it appeared out of nowhere, right? So when you talk about the law, I hate C4, Bill C4. You can say that. But you can't say, I hate Bill C4 that was brought in by the Liberals. Now you lost your charitable status. I'm going to actually get back to that again, only because it needs to be reinforced. That's the really, that's the spot where you need to be careful. But before I go there, if you wanted to, you could organize a protest against a policy. If you wanted, you could organize a protest against a decision of government. And I want to talk just for a moment about organizing a protest. So last fall, I was part of a massive protest over radical gender ideology in our public schools. And our rally was part of the 1 million person march that happened all over Canada. It was September 20th, 2023. So I'm one of the local organizers, but most of the local organizers were religious. They were religious officials. But the funny thing was, none of these professional clergy were Christian. All of them were Muslim religious leaders. And that was surprising to me and disappointing. Because the Christian pastors could have shown up. They could have led. Because protesting government laws and policies is legal for religious officials. And I really think that pastors and churches should be organizing more protests. Not because they're going to push the government to do something different. I really don't think it's going to change government. Especially if it's coming from Christians. I'm sorry. But it probably is less likely. But they do have a specific purpose. We need to realize that the purposes of a protest, while not to change government, are still significant. The first purpose is to build courage in the like-minded. When people see that others are thinking like them and are passionate about it, they become more willing to speak out after the protest. And remember, if you're in a protest, I don't know if you've done this, maybe some of you have. I'm getting to be an expert at it. It is super uncomfortable. Especially if you are someone who has a heart for God. You're thinking, I want to love these people, right? Now, typically we're not attacking anyone, right? And especially we're talking about policy or laws, we're attacking an idea, but you still know that other people don't like you. You know, the other side is there and they're saying really mean things about you. It's so uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to shout what you believe. And man, is it like a workout for your soul. Because after you do something like that, it is the most powerful training for public witness that you could experience. You know, you picture Peter in the temple being scolded and worn down by the Pharisees. Shut up! Stop talking! I can't. You experience that, you'll never go back. You'll be bold. So that's a really, really important part of the public protest. Here's another important thing. It causes anxiety in your opponents. In my experience, folks on the left, the progressives, the secularists, they are an incredibly fearful bunch. We take it for granted that we are a fearless people. We do. And it makes us surprised when we see someone who doesn't have the assurance of our faith. You know, it's a real contrast. And the research backs that up too. I was just looking at some recent survey data that shows that 56% of white progressive women aged 18 to 34 suffer from clinical mental illness. 56%! That is driven by fear. So they don't know how to handle it when someone disagrees with them. It makes them fear for their lives, and we can use that. I know I sound mean. Because they are afraid, they tend to overact. And they're more likely to do something foolish. And when they do that something foolish, we simply make the world realize it. We say, this is what they're all about. We let their own words condemn them. And that happens when they're fearful. And I want to talk about the third purpose. It's to make the general public aware that there is a problem in society. Increasingly, most people don't know what's happening in their country or their province or their city. They don't because the media will not tell them. The government often will not tell them. So by holding a protest, you actually shake your community from its stupor. C.S. Lewis, he went on to say that it's coming, 55-year-old. He said that pain is God's megaphone. Similarly, a protest can be a church's alarm clock. Why don't we wake up our community and say, this is what's going on? And so sometimes you have to be loud to awaken the many. So, one last thing about protests. If you're going to hold a protest, before you even put out a notice, you need to know that you've got the numbers. It's crucially important that you have a successful protest, and success is based on numbers. Big numbers attract big numbers. So before you announce we're having a protest or a rally, you can call it a rally, we're having a rally at such and such a place, you better have reached out to every church in your community and got commitment from them and their members. Because if you hold a protest and nobody comes, that has the opposite effect on your opponents. And you don't want that to happen. So key to success, one of the keys, is to make sure you've got the numbers ahead of time, and also you've got to control the message. Control the message tightly and make sure you appoint the people who are the spokespeople. And you tell everybody else, we have appointed spokespeople. We need you to know that the media are going to try and ruin us. If they talk to you, say this, give them 1 line, 2 lines, and then refer them to this person. You need to control the message. When we were doing this million-person march locally, I'm from Cambridge, it was the Kitchener-Waterloo area, we were very specific in our meetings, and as we told our members, here's what we're going to do. We said we're going to identify the problem, and we're going to word it in a way that attacks no person, but takes issue with the policy. That was number 1. 2, let's provide proof of the problem. People are going to say, what are you talking about? We'll say, here's the proof. Here's the problem, here's the proof. And then we said, here's what we want as a solution. Our message was really clear. And then finally, we said, and here's how you can join our movement, and people did. It was phenomenal. And the parents groups that started this are now enjoying tremendous success. And as far as I know, our region is one of the largest is a region that has the largest number of children who have been pulled out of the public school system this year. So the effect has been tremendous. So keep that in mind, that you want to have that clear message. Very briefly, this was the rally we were doing. I don't know who that handsome man is there. I want to point out a few things on this, though. When I was one of the lead speakers at this rally, and I knew that I wanted to use wording that would resonate with a culture that was steeped in ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Because the media and others were trying to paint me as a radical, a right-winger. So when I spoke, it says, David Haskell, professor at Wilfrid Laurier University, told the crowd that public educators are condemning diversity. They're condemning diversity of belief. Parents guiding the cultural and moral development of their children is not controversial. It's natural. What are we asking for? That parents get to guide the moral and cultural teaching of the kids. That's not controversial. Haskell told more than 1,000 people. Notice that the headline, they tried to play it down. Oh, some hundreds. It was thousands of people. But again, the media is going to try and, it wasn't successful. Look, 100 people. But they can't deny So what we finish with is, what is unnatural is for that sacred right to be taken away by public educators who say their values are better than parents. So you give the language that you know will resonate with parents. Some parent who's never thought about this issue of radical gender ideology. What? I get to teach my kids. My values are more important than the value of public educators. You craft it and you shape and you frame the narrative so that they understand better. All right. I want to remind you one more time about the restrictions. I'm going to remind you one more time. If you are going to criticize policy, you can't attach it, you can't link it, you can't connect it to a politician or a political party. So you can't do that. There are two other caveats. Restriction number 2, when you're criticizing the policy, and again, you're telling them you can either support it or not support it, you have to build arguments that are true. That shouldn't be a problem for any of us here. But the idea is you can't do what the other side does. The other side often lies. They really do. But you cannot. So if you are going to attack a policy or a law or decision of government, you have to do it with facts. You cannot make things up. And then finally, if you're going to attack them on social media, you're going to use Twitter or Facebook, you now find yourself in an interesting predicament because people can comment. And if people comment and they say something that's untrue, it can get you in trouble. So one solution is to cut off comments, or to have someone from your church who actually monitors and then removes the comments or comments on the comments. But just be aware that that is a legislative restriction that you are responsible for. Here's another thing that a church can do. A church can put out on a website or even as a brochure for the community a document that compares the policies of the parties. Now remember, I just told you, you cannot put policies and parties together. This is the exception. But it can only be done neutrally. So let's say that you wanted to talk about where each of the parties of Canada federally stood on abortion. You would then put the actual policy of each, maybe it's no policy at all, full access, whatever, as long as you don't make a comment and say, aren't they terrible? As long as you don't make an editorial comment, as long as you don't put the people you like in green and the people you don't like in red, you can't in any way show a bias. But as a church organization, you are allowed to create a comparison document that does mention policy and the party responsible for it. So you can keep that in mind. That could be, again, a website, or it could be a brochure that's handed out to your neighbors. But just no editorializing. And now, this is one of my more favorite things that a church can do. Churches can run a political debate. This right here, this shot, is the largest federal debate that was ever held by a church. The Catholic Church in Canada in 2019 held an all-candidates debate for the federal election. They held it in the Diocese of Toronto. That's me, right there. I'm shaking hands with the Conservative, and I say, I must break you. That's a line from Rocky, in case you didn't get the reference. And it's a terrific idea. So churches are allowed to organize a political debate between candidates. But it's got to be all parties. You've got to invite everybody from every party. It can be right in your sanctuary. It could be right in this hall. Again, the rule is you must invite all the candidates and you must ask them all the same questions. It's very similar to that neutral telling that I've already described. What do I mean by a major party? We don't have a sense of what a major party might be provincially. There's a lot of discrepancy there. You'd have to figure that out. But federally, we have a better idea. A major party typically is a party that has a sitting MP or is polling at around 4% in the polls. That's what we consider a major party. So you wouldn't have to invite the Rhinoceros Party to the debate or the Free Love Party to the debate, but you would have to invite the Green Party or the People's Party because they're polling around 4%. And holding a political debate is such an opportunity. I want you to appreciate what an opportunity this is because you get to tailor the questions for those people coming up here, and you get to ask them about what your community is concerned about. It is so huge. You as the church leadership get to ask the candidates about the issues that are never, ever brought up in the debate that's held by the Chamber of Commerce or in the debate that is held by the Environmental Club. Wouldn't you like to ask your local candidates about their party's position on abortion? Wouldn't you like to ask them about their government position on assisted suicide? Or provincially, how about parents' rights in education or school choice? How about things that are a little bit more controversial, like the now legal discrimination against whites in employment? Or how about compelled support for LGBT events? Would you ask them about that? Or the medical transition of children? Or the size and criteria of immigration? All these things do not get asked. But you could. But you can't if you don't organize the debate. Now keep in mind, this debate is not just for your Christian community. You want the debate that you organize to be the biggest one in your town or city. You want every local citizen to come because you want every local citizen to hear what the media isn't saying and what the establishment politicians won't say. Your church gets to ask the questions. And in a debate that you hold, you create the background to the question. I don't know if you've ever seen a debate, but they don't just ask, what's your position on? They give a little bit of historical data first. So let me give you an example. Picture this. We're at a debate. Your church has organized it, and you've invited the local political candidates running for the federal seat. So you've got the Liberal candidate, you've got the Conservative candidate, the NDP, the Green, and the PPC. Someone from your church is the moderator, and he begins the first round of questions with this. Candidates. Based on a Supreme Court decision, since 1988, Canada has been the only Western country without any law on abortion. In Canada today, it is fully legal for any child in the womb to be aborted at any time up until the point when they are delivered. While the government of Canada refuses to report the statistics on late-term abortions, a 2023 study published in the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality determined, quote, roughly 10% of hospital-based abortions in Canada, excluding Quebec, take place after the first trimester of pregnancy. Other Canadian medical sources suggest that the number of children aborted near the first trimester, third trimester, a time when they could have survived outside the womb, is around 200 a year. So, with these facts in mind, could each of the candidates answer how they personally feel about Canada not having any law restricting abortion? And then I'd like them to follow that with their party's position on the issue. Wouldn't that be a question? And you know what you do? You record it. And if you're the only church in all of Canada that did that, suddenly your video goes viral because you've got the answers that everybody else is looking for. But if every church does this, and every church records it, and we just flood the internet with it, people will finally be informed about what's going on in the country. So I'm mindful of the time. This is a very quick story. I was at a debate in 2019. Right here, this is the member of the Green Party. That's NDP. That's me. That's the Liberal. The Conservative didn't show